Winter forecaster Steve Boyle here. So we have quite a bit to talk about today. We're going to look at the storm from yesterday. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? And then we're going to look at the winter 2016-2017 official outlook. So that is what we're going to be doing. So let's first look at the storm totals across all of the Northeast here. And let me tell you, the Adirondacks, we had a little bit of a blow there, okay? But I would say the biggest blow was into Western Maine. This area did horrifically. But these two areas in here did worse than what I was thinking. Let me tell you, Western Maine, I was thinking perhaps into some areas over a foot. We didn't even pick up. For some of these areas didn't even pick up an inch. So, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad into these areas. We did not see what I was expecting. The heaviest precip ended up staying along the coast of Maine, which is, again, because the high pressure was centered somewhere in here, and you had these winds flowing in off of the ocean. These areas, if it was all snow, these areas would have picked up well over a foot, maybe even nearing 2 feet. But of course, with the winds coming off of the water, it kept everything a very heavy rain. But these areas is where the precipitation was. The Adirondacks picked up about 4 to 6 inches. Some of the highest peaks ended up picking up about 6 to 8 inches, but not as much as I was thinking. I was thinking there was going to be a widespread 6 to 8 in the Adirondacks, with some of the highest peaks picking up close to a foot of snow. Did not happen. However, the areas we did pretty well in was the Catskills, and I don't even think I really mentioned the Catskills in my video, in my last video, and I don't even think I showed that the Catskills were going to get a bigger amount of snow. But the Catskills did pick up a decent amount of snow. They ended up picking up about 4 to 6 inches of snow. I believe there was maybe even a couple areas that saw a little over 6 inches. The biggest area that we did the best, that really we did good, but I would say I was even on the low end here, was western Massachusetts, northern Connecticut, as well as southern Vermont. This area really overperformed quite considerably. The other area that that did pretty well, we did pretty well in, was the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So these two areas were the areas that picked up the most amounts of snow with this. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to zoom into southern New England, and we'll zoom into western Mass, southern Vermont, as well as northern Connecticut. And let me tell you, let's start with Connecticut here, because this area right in here, I wasn't expecting nothing. Perhaps the northern areas here, where I was thinking maybe a coating on the grassy surfaces. Hartford, let me tell you, they got almost an inch of snow. I believe it was like 0.8. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, there were some areas in here that I wasn't expecting nothing. There was actually flakes as far south as Meriden, Connecticut, and that was insane. I did not see that happening at all. You go up into the Enfield area, they picked up almost 2 inches of snow. You go into Granby, Connecticut, they picked up almost 3 inches of snow. So, I mean, these areas did very well as far as the snowfall is concerned. Now we get into, Massachusetts, and these areas in here really overperformed quite a bit. You go into Springfield, and they picked up about an inch of snow. I wasn't expecting really much of anything. You jump over into the feeding hills of Agawam, they picked up 3 inches of snow. I mean, you go into Granby, Mass, the Ludlow area, and we're between 2 to 3 inches of snow. You go over into Amherst, they picked up about nearing 3 inches of snow. Northampton picked up 2 inches. You jump over into the East Hampton, West Hampton area. They picked up almost 4 inches of snow. Actually, a little over 4 inches of snow. And then, you go into Conway, Mass, and they picked up about almost 5 inches of snow. So all of these areas in here overperformed, okay? And that was what was the big story here. Now, you go into, and we'll cut here, this area picked up about 2 to 4 inches, which was okay. But you go into this area right in here, and this is where we nailed it. I mean, we nailed it very well. This area picked up about 4 to 6 inches of snow, but you jump into way northern parts of the Berkshires here, and these areas in here, and into the Green Mountains here. This was really intense stuff. I was actually yesterday in Rowe, Mass, and Rowe ended up picking up over 6 inches, and into some areas ended up picking near 7 inches of snow. You jump over into Monroe. Monroe, Mass, picked up about 8. Yeah, picked up about 8 inches of snow. You go into Clarksburg, Mass, and Clarksburg ended up seeing about 8 inches of snow, maybe even near 9 inches. And this 8 to 9 with almost 10 inches into some of the highest peaks here, spread from, the way northern Berkshires on up into the Green Mountains, which was very intense. And, I would have to say the National Weather Service did pretty bad with this storm system. These areas that picked up high amounts of snow, there was no advisory, there was no warning, and into some of these areas, there wasn't even a statement, okay? There wasn't even a statement issued by the National Weather Service. There was nothing. And, the National Weather Service, I was reading their forecast discussions, and they were saying, maybe 1 to 2 inches, maybe 3 inches into the high terrain of these regions. They ended up picking up almost 3 times as much as what the National Weather Service was expecting. This was a serious blow to the National Weather Service. Much more. And I don't even think the National Weather Service was expecting accumulation on roadways. I mean, when I was coming back, you went along Route 2 into these regions, okay, and then you went on 91 down through here. So Route 2 was completely snow-covered. It was completely snow-covered, and this is a highly traveled road into Massachusetts if you're not familiar with this region. Route 2 was completely snow-covered, and even 91, which is a highway, okay, 91, which is a highway, there was areas where there was snow. It was a slushy snow. It was, and it was mainly in the middle, but, you have your 2 lanes. It was generally into the middle, but there was still snow on 91. And like I said, this is a highway, so much more accumulation. A lot of people are saying, it's going to be on the grassy surfaces. So this was a huge overperformer, and the reason why, and we kind of talked about this, was you had this big old high into Canada, and it was bringing down cold air, and this cold air was deep, okay? Temperatures started off into some of these areas Thursday morning into the low 20s. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of energy to push this cold air out. And what ended up happening is once the precipitation moved in, this precipitation, as it started precipitating, it actually dropped temperatures down. So we ended up getting that accumulation on the roads. And, it was pretty intense. So I would say, this region in here, it was a pretty intense time. And, you know, some people, there was lots of accidents into Western Massachusetts yesterday. And even myself going through Row, Mass, there was some close calls there. It was some really close calls. And, you know, it was really, the roads got pretty bad. And, you know, I don't usually denote the National Weather Service because they do a really good job. They try their hardest, but I would have to say the National Weather Service did a really bad job with the last storm. Really bad. You know, and the problem is even though that there's not a lot of people into those areas, they still got a lot of snow, and in these regions, you know, people travel and they're thinking, oh, maybe a couple inches, and a couple inches is, you know, although it can be a little nasty, it's still, you know, most people don't have a really tough time, especially into those areas. But once you get over 6 inches, things get bad, and if people aren't you know, prepared for it, that's when things are, you know, that's when you can get some serious problems. And it was clearly yesterday, traveling through that region, I could see people weren't prepared for it. I even talked, I kind of got out of my car and I kind of stopped into Row a little bit. And I saw a cop, and she told me, you know, all over the place there were people spinning out and getting into accidents. And so when people aren't prepared for a major storm like that, major snow, you know, that's when problems occur. So have to say the National Weather Service really did put people's lives in danger yesterday, which is, I think, the biggest downfall with how the National Weather Service handled it. Not, I wouldn't necessarily say the accumulations, but I would say just how, you know, they didn't put out any advisory or anything, which usually when you have at least an advisory, people tend to prepare a little bit more. So that is the situation with yesterday's storm system. And let's get into what we're looking at for the winter. So I'm starting with snow depth, and the reason why is because when you have snow and when you have a snowpack, that tends to breed cold weather systems, okay? And, you know, I want to kind of, the two areas I really want you to note here is this region in here, okay? But also, you know, down in here, okay, down in here. These are the two areas I want you to look at in comparison to last winter. Now, granted, there was more snow into parts of the Rockies, and granted, there was a wider spread snow up north. But notice, if you look at where we highlighted here, there's more snow down here, okay? And, you know, so you're kind of seeing the winter pattern that I'm looking at here. Now, granted, there is a little bit of snowpack into parts of, you know, the Rockies, parts of Wyoming. There's not much snow into the Rockies of Colorado. And now, as I'm going to be showing you here, I don't anticipate the Southern Rockies to get too much snow this winter. It's going to probably be a little bit below average. But where we do have some good snowpack up into the Northern Rockies is where I think things are going to be pretty nice. And clearly, the Northeast is clearly going to get more snow than last winter. I think it's pretty darn clear that we're on track for getting more snow into the Northeast. So that's what we're looking at this point. Now, this is again last winter, and you can see that the snowpack much further south. But even the snowpack up into parts of Canada, a lot less what last winter. So we are going to have these systems, and, you know, particularly as we head on in through the month of November, towards the end of November, we're going to start seeing our winter patterns starting to set up here. And you know, as the snowpack increases, we're going to see some of these cold systems diving down, and we'll see this pattern of, you know, cold into the east, warmer out west, this sort of pattern starting to take shape and sort of locking in a little bit. Now, I also wanted to show you the snowpack in Eurasia. This can also dictate how cold and snowy the winter is here into the United States, and particularly the eastern United States. And notice this bright green line was last winter. This is where we are as of right now. So we have more snow this winter in Eurasia than we saw last winter. Now, granted, this was around October 3rd, but, you know, things have been certainly looking more intense this winter. So here's the sea surface temperature anomalies, and, you know, again, our area that we focus in on is in here, okay? Notice it's cold. So, as I mentioned, yes, you know, when I gave my preliminary thoughts on the winter, I said weak La Nina, okay? And remember, we also said this was going to be a central to western-based La Nina. And notice that's where the coldest waters are. So things are starting to come together, and things are really looking like we're going to be seeing something along the terms of what I was expecting. So this is last winter's temperatures, okay, departure from average, November 1st through March 1st. And notice, you know, you go generally south of this line, and it wasn't a bad winter. It was actually a little bit of a, you know, a winter a little bit above average, okay? These areas are anywhere between 1 to 3 inches above, or 1 to 3 degrees above average. But you go north of here, particularly into New England, and look at this. I mean, these are temperatures of anywhere between, we'll say, 4 to 7 degrees above average. And again, you know, you go into the areas where we picked up snow, good amounts of snow yesterday, and 6 to 7 degrees above average. And I mean, even into all of the areas that have picked up snow thus far, I mean, you know, 5 to 7 degrees above average as far as temperature. You know, and into the Boston area, we were about 4 to 5 degrees above average. So, I mean, it was a warm winter last year. Now, this is snowfall averages, okay? And, you know, 130 to 160 inches into parts of New York. You go down into the D.C. area, anywhere between 10 to 20 inches of snow a year. You go into Philly, it's about, I believe, it's like about 20 inches of snow a year. New York City is about 30, okay? So all of these areas got about average to slightly above, particularly into Washington, D.C., and into parts of Virginia. Boston, I believe, is at about 40 inches of snow a year. Now, this doesn't really show it, but the Springfield area picks up about 45 inches of snow. They're a little bit high. This map is a little higher, but it's also not it's not a high resolution map. But I mean, you go into parts of the Berkshires, those folks see about 70 to 80 inches of snow a year. And, you know, you go north, well north, and they're talking anywhere between 80 to 100, perhaps even 110, 130 inches of snow a year. So, I mean, you know, you look at last winter's snowfall, okay? This was, again, this is accumulated snowfall from November 1st through March 1st. And, I mean, look at this. I mean, we have, you know, this is 20 to 30 inches in here, and some of these folks average about, you know, 50 inches of snow. So that's like anywhere between, you know, we're talking 50 inches, you know, below average into some cases, especially into here, okay? You know, we're talking into the Springfield area. They saw about 20 to 30 inches of snow. I mean, that's about 25 inches below average, you know. But like I said, you go up into these areas, they actually got less. They got 15 to 20 inches of snow last year, Okay, 15 to 20. You go into parts of New York State, and parts of Pennsylvania. I mean, this area right in here, 10 to 15 inches of snow, with some of these spots only 8 to 10 inches. And that's the whole winter. Horrible, horrible amounts of snow last year for these folks. It was a really bad ski season last winter. I mean, you even go into this area in here, 60 to 80, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of snow. But for them, that's almost only half of what they get in a typical year. Maybe even more than half, because that area gets anywhere between 130 and 160 inches of snow a year. So these folks, last winter, if you lived north, generally, of this line, okay, if you lived north of this line, you did pretty nasty last winter. It was a horrible winter. Washington, D.C., as I mentioned, did pretty well. They were actually slightly above average for snow last year. Philly saw about average, maybe even slightly above, and New York City saw about average. So all of these regions did okay. But, I mean, you go into the high elevations here, they were horrific as far as snowfall. So, I mean, and also northern New England. I mean, you look at Vermont, they picked up about 30 to 40 inches. And, I mean, look at what their typical snowfall is, 80 to 100. I mean, 30 to 40 inches, that's, that's about 50 inches or more below average. I mean, that is some serious snowfall deficits into these regions. So it was a bad winter last winter all around. Temperatures, snowfall. Now, of course, if you're not a snow lover, it was a good winter. But, I mean, typically folks who live that far north or into the mountains, usually they're accustomed to it, and they actually typically don't mind it. So, I mean, it was a bad winter for those folks. So now here is what based upon what we saw as far as the or what I'm looking at as far as the ENSO is concerned, and based upon some certain winters here, this is what I'm looking at as far as precipitation is concerned for this winter. So now we're getting into my thoughts for the winter in what I'm actually thinking here. So you go into the Northwest, and you see how it's well above average. Things in the beginning, and so from now through the beginning of the winter, we're going to get a lot of precip and a lot of storms moving in here. So I believe these areas are going to get quite a bit of rain, and into the highest elevations, they're going to get a lot of snow. Okay, I do believe these areas are also going to do relatively good as far as snow. It may be a little slow to start here, but I do think as we get in through the month of November, we could perhaps see some snow, some pretty good amounts of snow into these regions. Now, the real difference is these regions in here. Okay, these regions in here are going to see quite a bit of snow this year. Okay, so this is where, and again, above average precipitation. Okay, now this is the temperatures. And notice we have the coldest air into the northern plains and into parts of the Rockies. Now, the difference here is, as far as this winter, I don't think we're going to see the cold stuck into the southeast. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a little bit warmer conditions down in here. Okay, so we'll end up seeing a trough that's kind of like this. Okay, to where we kind of get warmer weather stuck down in here. Okay, so that's what it's looking like at this particular point. So here is my highlights of the winter of 2016-2017. Okay, so in comparison to last winter, we're going to see more snow and cold in comparison to last winter, but it's not going to be cold as far as even folks in here. Okay, these areas into here, it's going to be cold, but it's going to be pretty cold. And then we've got the bitter cold into the northern plains. These areas in here are going to be very cold. The Northeast isn't necessarily going to be very cold, they're going to be, slightly below average. The bigger story, I think, is going to be the snow, and it's already been the snow into these regions. Okay, so we're already starting to see this area verifying as far as seeing more snow than last winter, and actually it's been a pretty big story into this region. Also, another aspect that I want to highlight here is perhaps some heavy lake effect events here, especially when we get some of these high pressures that are scented. It goes clockwise. So when you get you're going to get your high pressures centered somewhere in here. Remember, we get, counterclockwise flow or clockwise flow. So, I mean, when you get some of these, you're going to get some pretty, at times, some pretty intense, snowfall into this region here. Especially if you can get this, some winds coming in from Canada, very cold winds. And I think we can get that, especially in the beginning here, into the lakes, but it may even continue through a good chunk of the winter because lake temperatures, the water temperature in the lakes are relatively high because of just how mild this summer and fall has been. Okay, so it's going to take a little while for the lakes to freeze over. To here, we are going to be rainy and stormy as we've been seeing, and then it's going to start warming up as the winter progresses. Okay, it's going to be very warm and dry into the desert Southwest and into Southern California. This area is going to be relatively warm. It's going to be relatively dry through a good chunk of Texas and into parts of Louisiana and areas like that. And then you go down into the southeast, and it's going to be mild. But not to say I don't think we could get any cool shots. I think we will get some cool shots. And so I do want to reiterate that, okay? But nevertheless, I'm not sure how the snow is going to end up turning out. I believe the Smokies could get below average snowfall. And here's the temperatures here. Notice you got the -4 lower up in here. It's just going to be bitter up there. It's going to be a bitter winter here. Now, notice the Northeast, I've got about 1 to 2 degrees below average. This is not by any means the coldest winter we've ever seen, but certainly much colder than last winter where we had like 2, 3, 4, again, as I just showed you, up to 7 degrees above average. So this is going to be significantly colder than last winter, okay? And again, another highlight here is the very warm weather down into the desert Southwest, and also parts of Florida I think could get on the warm side as well. So this is the general idea here as far as temperatures are concerned. Here's precipitation, and you have the above average precipitation into the Northwest. But also the bigger story is also the above average precipitation that we see here into the Northeast and into the Great Lakes. This whole area, I think, can get some really good precipitation, through the winter. Here is the snowfall, and again, you get some pretty good snowfall through the Northeast and also into parts of the Rockies, particularly, again, the Northern Rockies. Okay, the Northern Rockies. We're not necessarily talking about into these parts of the Rockies. These parts of the Rockies, I think we could be at average to slightly below average, just because of the way how the pattern will be, and also below normal snowfall down into Tennessee and into the Smokies, as I mentioned. These areas are going to be perhaps below normal as far as snowfall is concerned this year. Okay. So that's the whole country, okay? So we'll go back here. Very cold into the northern plains, central plains. Marginally cold into the Northeast. No, I also want you to note Washington, D.C. is also going to be slightly above average, okay? But it will be cooler than last winter, but not as but not as cold as areas to your north, okay? And then we talk about the precipitation. This is where I think above average and also below average precipitation through a good chunk of the south. Okay, and that's just because, you know, the northern stream this winter is going to be much more active. Okay, however, I think as we get towards January and February, you start getting your southern stream sort of, you know, getting more active into these regions. So what will end up happening is, yes, you will end up picking up precipitation in here, but with the temperatures being a little bit on the warmer side, I don't think we're going to end up getting snow. But I think towards, you know, the middle part of the winter, we could perhaps pick up some precipitation. So that's why I kind of have about average into these regions. But out into these regions, I think we're going to get some pretty dry weather as far as this winter. So in the beginning, we're going to see a lot of systems kind of coming out of Canada and impacting these regions. But towards the end, what will end up happening is the southern stream kind of gets active, and then you kind of see your northern stream kind of coming together, and you end up getting really big storms, particularly into January and February. But in the beginning, it's going to be more of these northern stream kind of clipper-like systems. So that's why I don't think the south is necessarily going to see a ton of precip, especially in the beginning. So again, there's the snowfall, and I outlined that here below normal and also below normal into here where it's going to be warm and dry. Okay, so this is the temperature change from last winter here into the Northeast, and the big story here is going to be areas north of this line seeing 8 to 10, if not colder than that, into some of these areas. It is going to be much colder into here, but the thing here is that it's not going to be the coldest winter. It looks cold in comparison to last winter, and it is going to be cold in comparison to last winter, but it is not going to be well below average for temperatures, okay? So it will be much colder into these regions, okay? We're going to be about 8 degrees, we're going to be about 6 to 8 degrees into central Pennsylvania, you know, going into parts of New Jersey. This includes like State College. Then, of course, West Virginia is about 4 to 6 degrees colder than last winter. And then you get into these areas, and, you know, this area was at about 4 to 6, or excuse me, about 2 to 4 degrees above average last winter. We're gonna end up being about average to slightly above. But again, you notice into this 8 to 10. I mean, you've got New York City, you've got Boston, you've got Hartford, Springfield. I mean, we've got Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So I mean, all of these regions. I would even go ahead and say Philly is in there. So I mean, all of these regions are going to be cooler than last winter, and into some cases considerably cooler than last winter. Snowfall in comparison to last winter is also going to be interesting. Notice you've got this area where it's going to be kind of less. You've got about 5 to 10 inches less than what we saw last winter. I mean, you go into DC and they saw almost, they saw about like, I think it was like 25. I think you'll see about 15 inches of snow this winter. You're going to see in Philly about the same, okay? And New York City, you're going to see about the same. You may even see into New York City about 5 inches more. Last winter, we picked up about 30 inches into New York City. I could see you getting about 35 inches there. But the big story is New England. That's where things are going to be much different. You see this area in here, and we're already on track into this area. Okay, it's going to be about 40 inches or higher in here. As well as into the lake effect snow belts region here. We're going to see about 40 inches or higher into those areas as well. So let's get into the actual snowfall, what I'm thinking about snowfall for this winter. Okay, and again, you get into this region in here. This is about 10 to 20 inches of snow. That's what we typically see in your average winter. Okay, you get into Philly, about 20 to 30 inches of snow, so about the same as last winter. You get into New York City, it's going to be about the same, maybe a little bit more, 30 to 40 inches there. Okay, that's about how much you see, a little bit more. I could see you getting about 10 inches more than what you saw last winter, 5 to 10 inches more. Mountains of West Virginia are going to do pretty well. You're going to see perhaps several inches more, 10 to 20 inches more than what you saw last winter. So I could see you getting up into the highest peaks, particularly Snowshoe, West Virginia, 80 to 100 inches of snow, which is, not, your average snow into here. You notice about 20 to 30 inches of snow extra. Your average snow in here is about 50 to 60 inches, maybe 70 inches in here. So, you're going to do relatively good. Now, the area that I also want to highlight here is northeastern Pennsylvania. Now, these folks typically see anywhere between, we'll say, as little as 40 inches, but you get closer and closer to Lake Erie, and your averages are nearing over 100 inches. So this green area, perhaps 110 inches this winter. Okay, and certainly, into this region. Remember, I showed you this is where we typically see about 130 to 160 inches. You're going to get about average, maybe even above that this winter. So certainly over 110 here, and also up into this region, and as well as on top of Mount Washington. As always, their average is close to 200 inches of snow, and they're going to get that, if not exceed it. So now we get into New England. Boston, I'm looking at about 50 to 60 inches of snow. Hartford, I'm looking at about 50 to 60 inches of snow. Providence, I'm thinking about 40 to 50 inches of snow. Go into Springfield. You're right on the line between 50 to 60 and 60 to 70. I think you're going to get about 55 to 60 inches of snow into the Springfield area. But you go just to the north and east, as well as to the north and west, and you're well into the 60 to 70 inches of snow. So some of the areas that are into the 60 to 70, we're talking, northeastern Massachusetts, so we're talking Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You go on into, Leominster. You go down into, Northampton. Northampton is in about 60 to 70. But then you jump over into just to the north and west of those areas. So now we're looking at, Athol. You go into, Greenfield. Those areas are going to pick up about 70 to 80 inches of snow this winter. And then you go into the areas that picked up really high amounts of snow yesterday, over 6 inches. So we're looking at the Monroe area like that, 80 to 100 inches of snow this winter. And then you go north of that, and you're talking about 100 to 110 inches of snow, and that includes a good chunk of the Green Mountains and, the White Mountains and places like that. So it's going to be a good winter this winter if you're into snow. I'm expecting the high when we're talking about the high impact storms here, I'm looking at those impacting us towards the middle to the end of December is when we'll start seeing these big storms perhaps impacting the Northeast here. The big guys, I think we're talking your blockbuster storms. I'm expecting those to impact the region coming in towards, like I said, from mid to late December through January and February. Now, this winter, I think, is going to be a winter where it's going to be tough to push it away. Do not see early spring being very warm at all. We may even still see some residual snows as we kind of saw today. Storm systems kind of like that, where we kind of see these residual snows and sort of chilly weather. Not really a warm early spring in comparison to last year where, winter just left automatically, the winter that we did have, right? It left and we sort of warmed things up dramatically. So things are going to be really different this winter. I wouldn't even be surprised if this winter is actually a full, complete winter. Some people are saying this is going to be a backloaded winter. I'm not certain about that. I do see potentials of snow as soon as, around Thanksgiving. So, but I think by the time we hit December, I think, things are going to really start cranking up. Although I think the biggest storms that will impact us are going to be towards January and February. But I don't think this is going to be a completely, I don't think we can characterize this as a backloaded winter. I think we're going to see, some storm systems impacting us towards the beginning here. And I think chances of a white Christmas into particularly New England are certainly higher than last winter. Last winter we had almost a 0% chance. I think the chances are, somewhat higher. I'm not necessarily predicting that we're going to see snow for Christmas, but, the chances, given everything combined together, I think are, relatively good as far as that's concerned. So this is my thoughts for the winter. We'll see how this works out, but I think this map right here, I think, is what everybody is looking for. And, that is generally what we're expecting. At average to above average snowfall, which is, again, these areas, this is, we're talking about 10 to 20 inches above average as far as snow. 10 to 20 inches is not, it's not incredible. Okay, let's not, I'm not saying this is going to be an incredible winter well above average snowfall, but we're going to see above average snowfall, 10 to 20 inches, which is a good amount. It's certainly going to be a nice winter, and we will get plenty of snow, and that's my thoughts. So, leave your comments below on what you think, and whether this is something that you're enjoying to see, or whether this is something that you can't stand. But this is it. This is my forecast. So we'll see what happens as we go through the winter, and next storm system, whenever that is. Some people are looking at a perhaps towards the middle to the end of November, and I'm seeing sort of the same. I'm seeing kind of similar indications as well, that perhaps as we go into the end of November, we see some really chilly weather coming in, and that could perhaps set the stage for some snow. So it'll be a little while before I'm back, but when we get our next snow, you can count on me being here, and we'll see how things turn out. But until then, you guys have a great rest of your October. Have a great Halloween, and have a great start to November. And hopefully we'll see you before Thanksgiving. But if not, we'll have a good Thanksgiving, and we'll see you sometime soon. Take care, everyone.